I want to get into some job interviewing tips for candidates. You've
Yep,
interviewed just a few people in your career.
I have, still am. Yep.
Probably thousands, hired hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, let me ask you a few specific tips around, interviewing for a job. How about this? I'm just starting my career search. I either got laid off or I want to switch, and I'm just starting. What are just a couple of things real quick I should do right away if I'm in the beginning of my job search?
Yeah. First of all, get into the mindset that job search is your new job. That is what you do now, 40 hours a week, days, nights, weekends. You are constantly plugged in. You can't do it part-time. Okay. But it starts with putting together a plan, and sometimes there's short-term plans that get you to the long-term plan, but take a little time to kind of map it out and start your journey that aligns with that plan. Next, regardless of what industry or level you're at or industry you're in, I recommend ABC, always be connecting, always be
Mm.
networking. Start talking to people. 80% of job placements are because of networking situations. So um,
80%. Wow. Wow.
put together a plan and start talking to people, and you're already moving in the right direction. But
Very good.
don't get lackadaisical about your efforts. Your job is just different than it was before.
Is LinkedIn important? I mean, do I need to, if I'm in my career search, do I need to really be active on LinkedIn? How do you kind of rate the importance of LinkedIn overall?
Yeah, great question. For most industries, I'd say it is. Other than personal relationships and networking, it is the primary way that organizations find talent, and vice versa.
Mhm.
So yeah, if you're in an industry that maps nicely to the LinkedIn framework and footprint, then absolutely you should be present, you should be active, you should have your voice heard. Occasionally individuals, there's a lot of individuals that are in roles that are not necessarily 100% aligned to the LinkedIn framework, but
Mm.
I would still take that methodology and apply it, right? So you don't have
Okay.
an online mechanism, but you still should have your voice heard in your community. You should still be active in your community, and you should be constantly expanding your virtual network. So that framework applies to I think most, and it's really about amplifying your voice and showing up.
Very good. Does the picture matter, by the way?
I don't the picture should, I think the picture should be professional, but it isn't a mandatory thing. It
Okay.
is an additional thing. The picture, your background, everything together really shows up as your whole self, right? So
Mm.
if something is out of order or something doesn't match, um, there should be a viable reason why that is. So it's
Mm.
not mandatory, but make sure you have a story behind it.
Okay, very good. How about this? I'm getting ready for my job interview. Two or three tips on, like, I know we could talk for hours on just this
Yeah.
one question, but two or three quick tips on preparing for my job interview.
Well, first of all, you and I have got a great podcast about this subject. So I refer
Right.
you back to that previous podcast. But to me, it really comes down to three things: networking, research, and practice. Practice, practice, practice. And
Mhm.
each one of those things, again, we could spend a lot of time about that. I've already commented on networking, but let's talk a little bit about research, right? You've got to understand who you're sitting in front of, both the company and the
Mhm.
individual. You have to spend time looking into the structure, their values, what are they doing in their community, what are they proud of,
Mhm.
and bringing that into the conversation. And then especially for individuals. And it doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy, if you're a college graduate just starting, or if you're a seasoned professional, practice, practice, practice. You will
Mhm.
fail miserably your first time out on the interview, and you may think you did well. But if you could put yourself into an environment with people that you trust and they will give you good advice, and you practice, 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 and get that advice. You'll really hone your skills. And it's nice to get that feedback from people that care about you. So network,
Very good.
research, practice.
Very good. How about this? Here's something people don't talk about a lot. What mistakes do you see candidates make once they're in process and the courtship, so to speak, has started? They've done the interview, but now there's emails and phone calls and correspondence going back and forth after the first interview. I often see some missteps there myself with candidates. What do you see, and what advice do you have there?
Yeah. Well, each company culture is a little bit different, but the advice that I have, I think, runs through most of them. Number one, as the recruiter, I am not your friend. My role is to see through you and
Mm,
align you with the role that I'm recruiting for. And
mhm,
oftentimes I come across as your friend. So don't take me for granted. Don't misjudge me. I do like to be liked, but I'm also doing my job at that point in time. So don't take me for granted, and don't rely on the relationship that we just formed in 30 minutes to get you through to the next step.
mhm,
So do the formalities and follow up. I do keep track of who sends me a thank you note or not.
mhm,
It doesn't always make a difference in whether they get the job or not, but it certainly does help. I guarantee it.
mhm,
And then secondly, don't underestimate the competition. There are people out there working harder than you, and they may be more or less qualified, but they might be a better networker. They might be a better interviewer. They might have an edge on you from an educational standpoint. You cannot underestimate your competition. You've got to show up
mhm.
all in every time.
Very good. Awesome advice. What couple of favorite questions you like to ask, or do you have specific ones you ask every interview? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do have ones that I ask at every interview, and they're based upon. I've been in HR for a long time, and
Mhm,
I've seen what successful people do as they migrate through their jobs and their career. And I tend to focus a lot on questions that have to do with grit and overcoming obstacles, right? So most people can do a job. It it's responding to the unknown that makes a difference. Sometimes there's positive opportunities that you have to seize and take advantage of, and sometimes there's negative situations that happen that you have to pivot. You have to do something different than what you typically do or what you plan to do. So that is one example that I tend to focus in on. Where have you had a plan? Um, that was disrupted, and you had to overcome obstacles or demonstrate grit.
mhm.
Tell me about the situation. What was your behavior and action, and ultimately what was the result? Overcoming obstacles, learning from mistakes, and managing multiple stakeholders are three questions that I generally ask every single candidate.
Very, very good. Here's something that comes up for me. As a recruiting firm, we interview people every day. Should candidates should candidates bring stuff up that they know the interviewer is probably worried about, but maybe the interviewer didn't ask the question? For example, maybe they have an hour and 15-minute commute, and the candidate is worried that, the commute's too long, and the interviewer's probably worried about it too. But for whatever reason, the interviewer doesn't bring it up. Should the candidate speak to those concerns that they know the interviewer's probably worried about, or should they not bring them up if they're not asked the question?
Yeah, I think, the objective here is to find the right fit, right? Am I, as the interviewer, interested in this person as a potential employee, and vice versa? Is that employee
Mhm.
interested in me as a candidate, or as an employer? So I think you should get it all out on the table and establish a relationship of transparency and trust from the very beginning. You could introduce the question by saying, is there anything that you're concerned about that we should spend a little extra time to talk about? And then validate that assumption they're worried about the commute,
Mm,
or you could just say flat out, I know there's a long commute associated with this role, but that pales in comparison to the long-term benefits that I'm going to get from an experience perspective. So turn it into a strength as opposed to a concern.
mm.
But yeah, I would, in the interest of transparency and trust and finding the right fit, I'd recommend getting out whatever is on your mind or their mind. Maybe
Okay.
validate that first.
Okay. Speaking of transparency and trust, should people say, "Hey, look, yeah, they fired me." here's why here's why I bring that up. I mean, just so often, people just skate around that question. They'll say something like, "Well, we reached a mutual decision to separate," or they'll say something other than, or they'll say something like, "Well, I just didn't agree with the direction of the company," or some bullshit line that you're,
Yeah.
you're thinking as the interviewer, like, "Okay, so you were fired." Should you just say, "Hey, look, I screwed up. This is what happened. They terminated me. I learned from it. I'm stronger for it, and I'm looking for another opportunity." I mean, how should you answer as a candidate?
Yeah, well, you just touched on it. A skilled interviewer knows that you're giving them a bunch of BS, right? And they can see right through it. But I think the answer is yes. I just had this happen last week where an individual told our talent acquisition team that they were let go, and they explained the situation. We believed them, and we brought them on board. We're excited to have this person join the team. But I can also share with you personally, when I was much younger. I was 19. I was fired, and I went to apply for the very next job, and I told them what had happened in my previous job, and we talked through it, and we had an honest conversation, and we did exactly what you just said. We focused on kind of some of the situation around it, let them know that I admit the mistake and that I have learned from it. So learning from mistakes, remember, that's one of my questions that I ask everybody is give me an example of where you've learned from a mistake and how you turn that into a learning opportunity. So
Mm.
I can just tell you personally, I've done it. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday, and I was really happy with the way it turned out. I had a great summer job experience as a result of it. So
I couldn't agree more. And, I really respect people that just tell me what happened and don't BS me. I really do. It speaks to their character and just all kinds of things. Very similar situation. I was 21 years old. I was a manager of a convenience store in a small town. The police chief's daughter was a cashier for me, and she was stealing money out of the register on a
oof.
regular basis. And I couldn't quite catch her. I was really pissed off that she was doing it. I was trying to catch her. Anyway, one day, the register was short again, and I just fired her on the spot. No documentation. I didn't call HR. I didn't call my boss. I just fired her. And so, not a good idea. Uh, her dad, who was the police chief of the town, came into the store and started lecturing me, standing on the sales floor. And he and I got into a very heated conversation where we were cursing each other out, basically on the sales floor in front of customers. Well, needless to say, I got fired.
Yep.
So
Now there's two job openings.
yeah, exactly. And I did the same thing. I went down, I applied for Camelot Music, where they used to have music stores. We had to go and buy music.
Yeah.
And I interviewed and I said, "Hey, this is what happened. I fired her. I didn't touch base with HR. I should have. I got into an argument with the dad in front of customers. I made a mistake. I'm sorry for it, and I'm just looking for another opportunity. And hope you guys give me a shot." And same thing. They highly respected that. I got the job. I worked there for 13 years. So yeah,
Yeah.
I really
Nice.
just encourage people to just be transparent and talk about what you learned from it, because it is a growing experience
It
almost every
is.
time.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, even when an individual is laid off, as humiliating as that can be, there's learning experiences in there
Yes,
too. So you should turn those into a positive conversation. So
totally agree. If you think today's tip or guest interview can help someone please share this with them. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. The Riderflex Podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviewing. You can visit riderflex.com to learn more about us and get information and pricing on the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.